how about some new wild ingredients that you might put in the petit four of your brain and let them bake? Why not? Small ingredients. Are you ready? So that was a pause. Now here we go. All laws are shackles. This is true at the ordinary level, but it is correct at the revolutionist level. All laws are shackles, limits, boundaries, chains, and at the ordinary level, maybe we'll get into it in a second, at the ordinary level, this would not be as negative as it may sound when I say that it is true even at the ordinary level and is correct all the way from so-called laws of science to laws of morality, laws of, in a religious sense. Even at the scientific sense, they would not necessarily describe it this way, but it's true at the ordinary level. The thing is about all laws being shackles is not that it's some mistake, not that it is specious or spurious or ill-founded, or that all laws are mistakes. Because if they actually seem to work, that is, they seem to be appropriate, if they seem to function, it's even worse. All right. Well, see, that was connected to me pointing out that they're not spurious. To say that all laws are shackles does not mean that all laws are some sort of deformed imagination, that they are ill-founded, that they are ill-conceived, that they are ill-executed. There is no real conditions to laws being shackles. Now, in the scientific sense, which I'm not going to stay and try and produce any great setup for this, but in the scientific sense, let's say, which would seem to be far removed from an offhand comment such as, all laws are shackles. You know, that's almost to a scientific bent, would sound too transcendental, if not weird. But all laws are shackles. That is, even at the strictly scientific sense, using that as exemplary of three-dimensional intelligence in the city. If all scientists right now took whatever they call the latest law of concerning the movement of particle physics, the latest law concerning the speed and direction of the loss of photons, whatever, some new law, the latest law, sometimes known as a theory, but if they call it a law, if it was accepted by the full scientific community, on a large scale, a small scale, if it was a law of physics, and all the members of the community heard it and went, okay. And that was the end of it. That no one struggled against that law. I assume you see at a quite simple level. There would be no such thing as so-called scientific progress. In that sense, at the crudest possible level, a law would be a shackle if everyone in the scientific community accepted it. Then if you want to look at it in a kind of relative spectrum of moving from that into the soft sciences, if they took the first comment ever made about man's psychology, if we took it in the Western world, there was some Greek historian or philosopher and made some comment all the way from that to Freud. If he said, well, anomalous sex drives or sex activities are caused by such and such, and it was stated as a law based upon his experience, his observation. If he was pushed, he would say. But if it was accepted, you understand, there would be no books printed, there'd be no different schools of psychology since the early turn of this century. And yet, the ordinary mind believes it is searching for laws. It will accept, although thus far, you and I both can tell, you don't really see the, I don't think anybody does, of any great importance of where this is going. But the ordinary mind is continually searching for laws, whether they're called that or not. There is a comfort, there is a safety, there is a regulatory apparatus regarding the growth of man in life, concerned with laws. And there's laws all the way from what would seem to be the most unscientific, the most subjective, as opposed to scientific and clinical, having to do with religion, human behavior, all the way from that to laws that would be considered in our time judicial, having to do with the commerce, the transaction, the interplay between peoples at the city level, all the way from that into the very hard scientific world. There is a comfort, there is a safety, but the laws regulate. And the first thing, I could give you another operational definition of when a group is becoming civilized, another one. First thing they do, they're showing any signs of being civilized, even if they do not know the word civilized yet. Moving back inside your own nervous system, inside the own history of man, one of the first things they will do is enact laws. And I'll bet somewhere somebody has probably said that in the city before. Some ordinary intellect will say, that's one of the first things people do is enact laws so that they can get along together. And that's probably true. I can live with that kind of theory. That as soon as some cavemen decided, let's live together instead of all fighting each other, and let's try and have enough social intercourse to where we might be able to find our overlapping fields of interest and needs, and we could profitably live together without strangling one another. And 4 or 5 of them went, okay. One of the first things they do is say, all right, we've got to have some laws. Like we won't steal from each other. We won't try and attack one another's wives. Let's leave those right now in the area of jurisprudence, because the laws are really more subtle in that when they start. And the first thing that happens amongst people, and now instead of me just talking about people and cavemen, speaking metaphorically at least, it's the collection of neural activities inside of a single nervous system, inside of a brain that becomes civilized. It begins to talk, and you begin to do your own history. Everyone does. That you begin to do your own history, coming out, metaphorically speaking, of the oceans and the swamps and the primeval ooze and the caves, and you become civilized. And the first thing that life makes the nervous system do in here and out there is search, grasp, not just for oxygen, of all those little nascent amphibians coming out of the sea. Your great-great-great-great-grandmother, looking at some of you, it's probably just your great-grandmother, but not just gasping for air, they're gasping for laws, laws, laws. And at first, though, it would seem to be very straightforward, observable laws, how to act, as I've already been through, that the cavemen get past the amphibians climbing up on the beach. Which, by the way, if your grandmother is still trying that, tell her not to try that around Miami Beach, because they don't stand for that stuff. But it is not just the laws that would obviously or easily seen of, all right, we are got to behave, we can't kill each other, we can't steal from each other, and we're going to reinvent the 10 Commandments. The laws are much more subtle in that when they start. The laws have to do with the regulation of growth. That is the comfort and the safety. It is not in the sense of morality, although it is, but that's not the basis of it. If a group starts to become civilized and they agree to some laws such as, all right, from now on, in our city, our group of cavemen, I'm calling that a city, and it can be a city when you begin to have your own neural systems pulled together enough and you become civilized, a little civilized tyke. But the people, you would say, would fit into my description of the comfort and the safety as soon as they enact and agree to some laws such as we will not steal food from each other. All right? It's certainly obviously true that that would offer them a degree of comfort and safety, that they no longer have to, every time they eat, at least amongst their people, their little city, their little civilization, they do not have to continue to look over their shoulder and eat like dogs. So there's a certain kind of comfort and safety. That is the crude reflection. There is an internal conservation of energy, a self-fueling mechanism that regulates growth, but it requires that the nervous system perceive it as being laws. And it comes out as to what should I do? How should I act? And lastly, which is actually the first, but the way the nervous system perceives it in space, lastly is what should I think? Because the laws start out in the Ten Commandments, just say, using that kind of Western. For those of you of a less clerical bent, you can go back and consider Solon, the great Greek. And don't anybody write and say that that's not the way he pronounced it. He was the first attorney, and I say that his name should have been pronounced Saloon. I can't help it. If he left an O out, his name should have been Saloon, so don't bug me with that. At any rate, other than that, if we get into, which was not that far away from being contemporary, if we get into the good old beginnings of the Jewish history and the Ten Commandments, it just has to do with behavior. But then if we want to stay in that side of the world, then it comes along, and sometime later you've got the figures in the New Testament that not just say, don't take your neighbor's wife, then they began to attack, they began to deal with the thinking like, well, hey, if you think about having your neighbor's wife, and it's almost as bad, which is not, I assure you, what it was originally meant. It was the same kind of energies going on. And it is not conducive to the continuation and stability of civilization, even if everyone in some way could be frightened, all of our cavemen, even if they're a few hundred or thousand years now away from the caves, if for some reason they will not now, all the time, or just freely attack each other's wife because they have agreed that, if you attack somebody else's wife, we'll hold you down and pull out your fingernails and make you listen to Don Ho records. They may be able to stop the behavior, but then, some thousands of years after the Ten Commandments, still using it just as an archetype, instead of just affecting behavior that, you should not do so-and-so, then this guy Jesus, whoever that was saying, hey, if everybody goes around and still thinks about that, if you just let it go, even if you're afraid to do it, if you keep thinking like that, we're pulling at the fabric of civilization. Is that what you think now has some effect, whereas when you're less civilized, let us say like a dog, which is not a perfect example, of course, but the original Ten Commandments, the original laws of a group as they're becoming civilized, the laws were just, hey, don't do that. Sit, heel. No, don't chew my shoe. And it's as though life at that time, where a man was, did not care in the same way that most people do not care if you've got a pet. Whether the dog really agrees. If you tell the dog no when he chews your shoe, you don't really think about, does he like me telling him not to chew a shoe? All you're asking is, don't chew the shoe. You don't have to like me for saying it. You don't have to dislike me. Just don't chew. That is like the original laws. That is like the first rules governing a group, whether it be out there or in here, of them becoming civilized. It's just a behavior, in a sense, with no notice given to what might be going on at other levels. Which, of course, those of you getting good, at that time, speaking three-dimensional, there was nothing else going on. Oh, there was some, the intellect was going some, but not enough to be of great consequence, you understand? Do you? Let me use it three-dimensionally again, because some of you should be able to begin to think like this. Lie to me and tell me you can sometime. It's really inside the nervous system, and you've got to remember it's not gone anywhere. It's still there. The past is not gone. The intellect had to be going some for there to be, let me stay with the Ten Commandments for a minute, or any of the laws back then that was going on that were directed at behavior. It just said, don't do so-and-so, to use the negative aspect. Don't do it. And it's as though life at that time, in the same way as a dog, it didn't say, don't do that, and I'll tell you why. Though the original Ten Commandments, the kinds of stuff you find in the Upanishads, and the stuff you find all over the world that seemed to be, let's say, religious at the time, that said, don't do so-and-so, or go do so-and-so. None of it said, go do so-and-so, comma, and I'll tell you why. None of that, it just said, go do it, or don't do it. But then, like, it was still going on, but you understand that, relatively speaking, it was then of less consequence than the part of the human nervous system, let's say, that's saying, don't go sexually attack people that you're not involved with, your neighbor's mate. The directions were aimed, although the intellect had to be going or they would not be talking. They had to be that civilized. But it was not the intellect that had that much control. They were really talking to the mind of the hips, of the genitalia, in a sense. They were telling them, don't do it. But it didn't tell them, don't do it because gods don't like it, or don't do it because It's uncouth. They just said, don't do it. Of course, it was normally added because the God said so. It was the civilizing influence, it was the needs of life that said so. But then, still speaking three dimensions, that's what I was trying to get you to see, in all societies, not just using Judeo-Christianity, but it went from there just being do's and don'ts into taking into consideration as man becomes civilized, as he began to develop human emotions, and the intellect really got fired up and became of more consequence, and it was possible more and more for men to be talked to at this end and to affect this end. To say, hey, you're getting pretty good that a lot of you are not now attacking every woman you see that's not part of your household. But you got to notice this. A bunch of you going around, you think about it all the time, and you're always looking, and if we let down our guard, speaking for civilization, if we let down our guard, if we broke down and decided to have a Mardi Gras, I hate to think about it, because you guys still don't realize why we've got this rule. You're still going around, and mentally, you're sucking it to it, every woman you see. You don't do that, in a sense. But it was only, that came about, it was only then that these prophets and religions began to say, as a man thinketh, Buddha, all sorts of people then begin to show up and say, what a man thinks about is really what he is. Or this is the kind of translations I know you people have heard. Or, as a man thinketh in his heart, so he does. Whether he actually does or not. And all they're saying is, we're still chipping away, we're still putting an undue strain on this delicate new weaving of civilization, if you don't realize that just because you have quit living totally from your hips and your gut the way that you wanted to in times past, you still don't realize that you need to sort of do something about this. And of course, it's still getting fed from the wants, as it still is. It still gets the messages from the hips and the stomach. But it's now saying that you people are becoming strong enough, that is, the intellects are becoming strong enough, that you should be able to turn the direction back and make the hips and the gut more civilized. Those kind of laws, that is the comfort and safety of growth. It has nothing to do with morality, not from a revolutionist view. That is a more complex view. If you can get away from 3D history and 3D reality, it is comfort, it is safety, it is just a definition of civilization at the secondary level. But it is much more than that. That doesn't begin to cover it. It is like a governor. It is an apparatus that regulates the speed, the tempo, the way in which life grows through man. And it comes out as laws. Whether they're called that or not, you're sure they're standards of morality, mores, religious teachings, words of the gods, but it's all just, that's as good as a word as any for what we're trying to look at tonight. They're all laws. All the way from that to the laws of motion, from Newton on to Planck and everyone else, whatever is the latest up to date, they're all laws. But they are shackles. At the ordinary level, it's of no great consequence, because life grows in such a way that the shackles are broken, that the laws are replaced. They're expanded, there are new theories, and I'm using laws as I assume you can see by now that even scientifically they're usually referred to as theories. But they're continued to replace. The shackles are broken and life expands. But a real revolutionist, somebody attempting to do this, cannot afford the luxury period. You cannot sit around and wait for life to grow and break the shackles of what you believe. That is, what you think, not what you do anymore, and really not what you think in any sort of human sense. Because you cannot limit yourself to satisfying the external requirements for being civilized. Now, you do it externally, or you'd be, it's not even worth talking about. Well, you're certainly not involved in any sort of activity. You're just a run-of-the-mill young biscuit-brained young Turk out in the street. You might as well crawl into Marlon Brando's underwear and holler, "I'm rebelling." Whether anybody ever asks you against what, you don't even know. You just holler, "I'm rebelling." Just screw it all. See, that's a hobby. It's a hobby. At least you don't have to stand in line at the post office to get the new stamps. There's some hobbies that it's up to you. No offense to philanderers. You people who collect stamps. But a real revolutionist does not have, not at the hip level, not at the gut level, not at the emotional level, he doesn't have the luxury of rebelling against that. He doesn't have the luxury of attempting or submitting to it, of bowing down to such gods to please those kinds of laws. And not because they're right or wrong. To be a true subversive in your day and time, to do something, to pursue something that might be possible, you've got to be trying to, in a sense, rebel at this level. That's the only one that counts anymore. If you think otherwise, here comes the Kairoot. If you think otherwise, you don't think. How's that? There is no rebellion left. I mean, it's long gone. You should be able to see this by now. And I know the fun of it. All of you know the fun of it. Somewhere along the way of being a kid and sticking out your tongue at a priest or a rabbi or your grandfather or a teacher when they turn their back. Everybody, so what? That's 5 or 6 years of age. And don't tell me that you're still around sticking out your tongue. But if they show the president of some other nation or somebody on Wall Street or some senator at a hearing taking up for those fat cats that stripped us poor taxpayers again and lying to us, and you sit there in the TV instead of now being 6 years old and sticking out your tongue when a teacher turns their back. I mean, hell, you've now had several years of college and pretty sophisticated. You're now in your 30s or 40s, so you're beyond that. You stick your tongue out the TV. There is no such rebellion left. You're thousands of years behind. There is no rebellion at the level of the hips, which can think, as the genitalia. There is no rebellion left in the stomach. There's none. Not profitable. I know people still do it, and there's none left. I guess I have to throw it in, since ordinary people still call it, but it's what I was pointing out to you last time we were talking, the human emotions from the good old symbolic heart. There is no rebellion left there, not of any profit. And if you think that, you don't think. If you think that, you're not even partially in touch with doing anything new. All of it's been done. It's all far behind, not just you vis-a-vis the external world, but it's been done in your nervous system. All of that rebellion, all of those throwing over of statues and breaking up these golden calves and throwing over all the idols that Muhammad wrestled with. All that stuff's already been done. Literally, metaphorically, symbolically, and then literally again. Thank you. There is no such rebellion. There are no laws left to break that will profit a revolutionist. Except here, at the very place that ordinary intelligence, that is, city intelligence, would tell you that you're now getting close, if not into the world, of clinical, objective science of some kind. That's what ordinary intelligence would be telling me if it was listening in a certain way. That you're saying, well, you're trying to kick over rational thought, sequential thought, logic, reason. That's the only way that ordinary intelligence could respond to it. That's why I'm trying to get you to just lump it all together as laws, whatever they are. Let's assume that you, somewhere this side of being involved with this kind of stuff, that you, all of your intelligence, all of your experience, whatever native smarts you seem to have had, and whatever education, at that level, at your best level, whatever you thought was a law. It was a law to you. Assuming that you were a reasonable, intelligent, everyday person, somebody that life expected to be proud of and expected to show up, remember, at your wake and go, God bless him, son of a bitch died and dead. Love him. What a guy, what a guy. Got to go, got more places, more funerals to attend. Life expected that of you. Everything that you thought, I don't care what religion, I don't care how much education, it doesn't matter. Whatever you thought were laws. If you thought that all politicians are jerks, if you thought that any decent person should contribute to charity, if you thought that anybody that contributes to charity is a jerk himself, it doesn't matter. What you thought were laws. And not just having to do with out there, everything that you thought about yourself, the kinds of things ordinary psychology, that is ordinary intelligence in the city, would say is a kind of subconscious, inspecific sense of oneself. I could be a little more specific and say that anything that you said about what kind of guy you were to yourself, and you're always saying what kind of guy you are at the ordinary level. You just walk by a mirror, walk by a plate glass window, and you go, you're saying what kind of guy you are. You don't have to say anything. It's not an attack on vanity of some kind. It's just anything. You're saying what kind of guy you are if you take that personally. If you think that's you, that, well, I guess I do have some little tics and maybe habits or things I do that maybe they're unconscious. See, you're piggybacking yourself again because you're still saying what kind of guy you are. Even if you say, well, hey, I ain't going to tell you what kind of guy I am. Because, that's just that's the way I am. I don't like to talk about me. I'm working on being humble without an H. I don't know. It is all, now we're back to speaking at the highest possible end of the nervous system. They are laws. Everything that you think about yourself, now I know ordinary people, I'll say it again, they instead of think might want for me to say feel. Throw that in if you want to, for the time being. Some children insist that you have got to have that cheap purple in their crayon box when they first go to kindergarten. They outgrow it, but if you insist, and when I say think, you can say to yourself, think/feel. Of course, you get good, really parenthetically, it should go think/feel/burn. Cut them and run. If you're ever worked in the cane fields. The laws are everything that you think/feel about you. And they are shackles, not of some moral sense, not of some subconscious sense, but they become laws that must be pleased. They become a kind of intellectual gods to which one must bow without knowing it. You can be an atheist, that doesn't matter. And vis-a-vis what we were talking about last time of being civilized, recall that one real operational definition is being civilized is a person pretending that which is individually irrelevant to him, other people starving, other people being without fashionable clothes. If starving is too strong for some of you people with laudable feelings. How about skip hunger? I just did that to get your attention last time. The people all over the world, forget going hungry, I think we'll assume that they all can find something to eat. It's people all over the world somewhat worse. Many people having to go without fashionable clothes. I mean, people who are just completely, not just outdated, but just gauche in their attire. So, that, back to one operational definition of being civilized, is for a man who finds things to be individually impertinent. Like, he hears that a lot of people in other parts of the world do not have a fashionable wardrobe to their name. Perhaps not even one piece of designer clothing at all. Name a scarf. And he hears this. And he straightens out his own, Bill Blass and Saint Laurent, whatever. And he thinks, so what? I had to go in debt to buy this crap. What do I care? But to be civilized, the definition would be that he is standing there with his Chardonnay, and he's at a party, and someone says, do you realize the word is out? Someone has gone over and checked. And in Mozambique, I mean, it's hard to believe. And this was the middle class we went through in the city. I read it right here. I tore it out of the magazine. They did extensive surveying, and well over 74, somewhere between 74 and 77% of the people in that country do not have a fashionable wardrobe. And so there the man stands, civilized, with his own civilized, fashionable duds on, and he thinks to himself, what the hell do I care? But to be civilized, what would you do? You go, my. Could that be correct? That is being civilized. I'm not being sarcastic, I'm just being dramatic for you to try. and get somewhere that your normal petty four would never have opened his mouth and say, bring it on. We're ready to cook now. You'd have never. That would be civilized, remember, at the ordinary sense. But again, I want to point out that a real revolutionist cannot in any way afford to be civilized in that manner. If you pretend, now we're not talking about externally, I'll repeat again, because externally, certainly pretend. Certainly. Especially if somebody whips a glass of Chardonnay, you can at least change the subject and take a sip and go, no. No, it's a matter of taste. It's not that you do not externally do it, but now I'm talking about the internal operations of the nervous system up here. You cannot go along with this pretense because it is a part of the legal, that is the law system, and the intellect already. And if you go along with it, what it's going to do, that if you go along with any law, in the widest sense of the term, any law intellectually that the human mind can produce, can formulate, which, that covers it. Anything that you can ever hear from any source, I don't care whether it seems religious, and if it is religious, I don't care what religion, if it seems to be philosophical, it seems to be just neighborhood common sense, it doesn't matter. If the human, we're talking about ordinarily, you wouldn't have heard it, so it's ordinary anyway. Any intellectual law that the ordinary human mind can formulate is captious. It is so expensive that a revolutionist cannot afford the luxury of fooling with it. And it will specifically do this, so that I don't appear to just leave as some kind of new law that I've put forth, like you can't do it. If you go along with that, with any law, and according to how you want to look at it or how we want to describe it, to go along with any law, to accept it as being a real idea, a real piece of important energy that somebody handed you and you took it, you end up, whether it seems to be in a moral sense or otherwise, you end up either being, for instance, correct or incorrect eventually. Or you end up being a saint or a sinner. You end up being either a success or a failure. Now again, we're talking up here. Forget what appears to be the normal fashionable sense of standing in the slaughter queue. Or you end up either being vain or guilty. As long as you will accept intellectually, as long as you will accept any law that is an intellectual law, which if it's put in words, it's going to affect the way you think, / the way you think you feel about yourself, then it is a law. Intellectually submitting to any such law is the ultimate surrender to persuasion. You recall we were speaking of persuasion. And you have been almost persuaded outside the three general directions that contemporary city psychology, human thought, accepts as being the three corridors for a person to be persuaded. In other words, you've been killed without a weapon, in a sense, intellectually again. Because to submit to any such intellectual law is an ultimate surrender to persuasion. Let me try at least a coda to that, or a tagline, is all intellectual. All mechanical laws affecting the intellect must persuade. In the widest sense of persuasion, now we were talking about that very recently. But in the widest sense, all mechanical, that is, all city laws of all sorts aimed at this, must persuade. That's why they referred to and talked about as being laws, commandments, if we were in morality or religion. Clinical, objective theories. They must persuade. That's how they work. Whereas something beyond that, something outside that, let us say, for the time being, call it again, revolutionist information, is not in the business of persuasion, it just simply is. But when it is no law. That's why you never hear of it. That's why when you think you hear of it, maybe I was doing this, then a few hours later or the next time we meet, you think you hear it unlawed. Or you think, wait a minute, I either got this reversed Or somebody has changed the song and playing it backwards and never even noticed it. Right. Well, I foresee this seems to be striking some of you as sticky, so let's just change the subject. Sort of. All right. Could you connect in this with something else that we talked about recently? There's a certain view regarding the E-pool and how it feeds the future. That is where the future comes from at the level at which the three forces that we've been referring to them, the three factors, the C, D, and E, the one that seems to be relevant at any particular time. That is where the three-dimensional future is fed, or from which the three-dimensional future is fed. Connected with sort of what we were talking about. I say sort of. If it doesn't strike you, then assume that we did change the subject. But specifically with this. Men, and I'm using men now, I'm using the word men as like men, a hyphenated phrase, men dash as dash life. That is, in a legal sense, men, the agent for life, the principle. I'm going to say men, but we're talking about life itself operating at this level and us being its little agents. You remember we one time had a short lesson in the law. An agent is someone who is legally, somebody who is responsibly, somebody who is directly operating in the name of someone else, a principal. If you own a business and you send your employee to the bank to go borrow money or sign a check and you give him authority, he is your agent and you are his principal. So I'm using men as always, men the agent for life the principal. In a sense they're synonymous, except you would have to know that synonymous goes beyond three dimensions. Now back to where we were. Don't ask me where that was. Here. Regarding the E-pool, the E factor feeding the future. Now here we go again. As men do not learn from the mistakes they make, but from the ones never made. Now for the pregnant dramatic pause while I have a sip of something. Men do not learn from their mistakes, from the mistakes they make, but from the ones never made. That is not as ridiculous as it sounds. Well, first off, what men ordinarily refer to as mistakes they have made. Take that as a full term, mistakes they have made. In any sense, from a misguided intellectual scientific theory to something that you did behaviorally with another person socially. No matter what. What men refer to as mistakes I've made are in fact something else. They are partially labeled. Winners from some C and D duel or dance. What they call mistakes I've made are actually their life is in a sense, this couple. In one couple, there's been a winner come from a couple. The couple not become the winner, remember. But C and D has been dancing or dueling according to what state of heat your limbic system is producing under your brain tonight. So you can look at it as being a duel or a dance. Same thing. What people say, mistakes I've made. And of course you can only refer to mistakes I've made somewhere within a few seconds, hours, days of whatever it was. Well, mistakes I made in there is one, and then they go into about what they could learn from it, etc. But it's misnamed. I wish we could get more subtle. I said just partially labeled, partially named, because misname is not true. It's not misnamed. What people call mistakes in the city are mistakes. Except, remember this, mistake, the word mistake is a synonym for more things than you would ever want to think about. More than you would ever want to imagine. But I'm not sure you can turn the coin over. Keep listening. What people refer to as mistakes is a kind of outcome. It's an E factor. It's a kind of outcome from a CD situation going on. That somebody's been dancing. It could have been all in you. You're just thinking about something. And then you decided, well, here's my conclusion, and you go blah, 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 and you stay at the party, and everyone drops their white wine. Even people who were lucky enough to avoid the Chardonnay, everybody goes, what? And your little brain flashes, instead of tilt, it goes faux pas, faux pas, faux pas. And you think, what if I did? And your brain says, done. All right, what have I done? And you say, all right, I made a mistake. You follow? I'll learn from this. My God, I won't ever say that again. I'll be sure and look up words or know what I'm talking about. That was a mistake I made. It was not a mistake you made. It was, in a sense, as far as the 3D world is concerned right then, it was a kind of conclusion to something going on. There was a dance already going on between C and D factors, between a law and a struggle against the law. And the outcome is normally referred to, not incorrectly, I'm just trying to ease you, it's just partially labeled. Not incorrect, they just don't have the full label on it. What they call mistakes I've made was the winners in some conflict, in some dance between two laws, or between a law trying to supersede one, or between you, apparently, in here arguing with the law. Should I speak up or not? Do I understand what I'm about to say or not? Do I care? Whatever it was, it is a kind of temporary conclusion. It is like the kind of scenes they have. A 30-minute show on television. If you watch enough TV, 10 or 15 shows, you can tell when they're about to break for a commercial. They always build up, and if it's a comedy, to what I think they're pleased to refer to as a humorous line. But they try to build up. It's not a conclusion to the show because you know that the show's only been on 5 or 6 minutes before they go to commercial. But it's like it's like a comma or a semicolon. That is what people normally refer to, the intellect, as mistakes I've made. It was like the attempt to come up with a slightly funny line, a little teaser, maybe on a news show. You can tell they're about to go to commercial, and they'll say, but coming up in just a minute is the world may be coming to an end, stay tuned. It's, try to get you just live through the commercial. It is the intellect living through this continual dance. But what it calls mistakes I have made are no such thing. Here's another area that we never have gotten into. I've mentioned it several times, including tonight. This kind of three-dimensional impossibility of things piggybacking themselves. Here is yet, if you can hear it parenthetically, another great example of piggybacking, because, even though I say it's not true, maybe some of you can hear it, what people call mistakes, they're mistakenly calling them that. Well, it keeps things active, if not interesting. Or it keeps things interesting, if not active. It's better the other way. But to understand, for people to mistakenly have an absolutely unquestioned opinion about what mistakes are that they've made. But imagine, try right quick, this three-dimensional impossibility of a thing getting on its own back. Of somebody eating their own foot. Somebody gets hungry and they pick up their own foot or start here and they begin to eat. Not only, you could say, I guess it's possible for somebody to try it. Not only that, they blossom. They thrive. And three-dimensionally, of course, it's impossible. And yet here it is again. That I could say, what is the most mistaken verbal act that man can do? Now I could say the answer is to call anything he thinks a mistake. That is the epitome of a mistake. And the ordinary intellect could do all sorts of things like do this and say, oh, that's insane, or that's illogical, or it could say, Jesus. It is a thriving cottage industry within the brain of man. What occurs, to get to the other part of it, you remember where we started this particular paragraph, that men do not learn from mistakes they have made, but from ones never made. What occurs behind the words of me saying learning from mistakes they've never made, as opposed to actually learning from mistakes they have made, the reality behind describing it as learning from mistakes that you have never made is this, that it draws from the E-factor pool of things never thought, yet to be discovered areas, yet to be executed activities. That, and the real, I'm going to do this, is where men learn from. Not from mistakes they've made. Because what men call mistakes they've made, if they learn from those mistakes, what would happen? What they call mistakes would become laws. And no one would ever do that again. And if no one ever did that again, it would be as though this great clammy hand got free from the Costa Nostra and reached up on this great train on which we all ride and grabbed that cord and went, ugh! And I must tell you, we would all come to a most jarring, immediate halt. We would all be thrown through the windshield of the train. And I know windshields are fairly scarce on trains, but your face and your nose, that is your brain, would be, life would cease as we know it. Was that enough drama? All right, let's tell the truth. Melodrama. All right, do men learn from their mistakes? That's not an attack on man. It's not pointing at his stupidity. Men make mistakes. What mistakes are men making now? Are there any new mistakes? No. Are they still teaching the Ten Commandments? Yeah. Now, I know that laws, for those of you that might keep up, they continue, legislatures and parliaments throughout the world continue to turn out laws, but every damn one of them will fit into the Ten Commandments. And even less, but we'll stick with Western tradition. You can take every law on every book in the Western world, and even the Eastern world, but in the Western world, and every one of them is simply a variation of the Ten Commandments. So is man in any way making new mistakes? No. I mean, just face it. All right. What the hell's going on then? What do you make of this? Is man so stupid, individually and collectively, institutionally, is he so stupid that we look back and say, well, wait a minute, let's go back to just the little scribblings on those little condom packages that the Sumerians left, or the pottery, the Greeks, Homer, every story that they've told about the aggressions of man, the mistakes, the wars, the genocides, the fratricides, the French fries that they have done, that men recognize. They recognized it then. The scribes wrote it down contemporaneously that, we made a grave mistake. We should have never done this. They wrote it down 5,000 years ago. Man's still doing the same thing. What do you make of that? We'll assume that all of you are good enough now that you are not critics and you're not being sarcastic. What do you make of this? We can now fly men to the moon and all sorts of things. We can now produce running shoes that, well, nowadays, no matter how much you pay, they've got to a point they will not last over about 6 weeks. Now, if they can do... I didn't mean to say that. You understand? If they can do all that, here's the point. There is no sarcasm. Sarcasm only comes about through stupidity. Sarcasm is a mistake people make, which is not a mistake. It just keeps things active. But so we'll assume all you people can get beyond that. What's up that man has not learned from his mistakes? Now just face it. There's no morality to it. There's no moral to this. There's no attack to this. But what man says are his mistakes, the ones that he made in the Garden of Eden, he's making today. So to say that men learn from their mistakes, you've got to see that's not true. And so assuming that man's not stupid because life's not stupid, then you're left with this, if you get good, is wait a minute, the whole idea of learning from mistakes, I bet there's a flaw in there somewhere. That is, something is less than totally labeled. That is, I less than totally see it. So what would it be? Wait a minute. What if the word mistake has been mislabeled? It's like you went to the store and it's labeled mayonnaise. And you go home and it turns out to be super hot sauce. What if the thing is mislabeled? What people call mistakes are not mistakes. Then you understand that the energy and the verbal dressing on saying men should learn from their mistakes. And then somebody say, well, men do not learn from their mistakes because we are by God we're making the same mistakes that our forefathers made. Well, I got to tell you the truth. Sometimes I make the same mistake. I'll do something, I'll swear I'll never do that again, and I'll be down, a fortnight from now. I'll say, when did I say fortnight, since I'm not British? And I'll say, God, here I am doing it again. What if the word mistake is partially labeled? That is, it's not a mistake. But then do you see that it's not a matter of men learning from their mistakes? Because then that's part of the energy is someone can stand up in any city park, at any level of ordinary civilization and say, men do not learn from their mistakes, men are idiots. Men are fools, and just say the kind of things I have. We're doing the same things that they were doing 5,000 years ago. And anybody has any knowledge of history, any of you intelligent, reasonable people here will agree, and people go, God, he's right. Life does suck. Boy, humans are dumb. We're all idiots. Well, speaking generically, I'm not referring to me, but yeah, that's right. We're all stupid. You understand? That is activity. That is circulation in action. It shows that life is not getting varicose veins, assuming that you're part of its lower extremities. No offense to you, but if you happen to be there, that the circulation is still good. But it's easy to point out that humanity obviously has not learned from their mistakes. But now, if you see it in a different way, using that description, using that beginning to try and trace some kind of circulation of energy, then you've got to see it's not a matter of man learning from mistakes. It's not possible. That's not the intent. If they're to even stay in the same general area, it's talking about mistakes, is men learn from mistakes that they've never made. That's the only place to learn. Come on. I'll try another way. They got to learn from brand new mistakes. That is, they've got to learn from mistakes they've yet to make. If you still won't call them mistakes, don't you see? Anything you've done, there is no learning from it. To stay with the word mistake, if you're going to learn from mistakes, it's got to be mistakes you hadn't done yet. That's the only place to learn, because there is the outcome. There is the E factor in regard to what you already did that produced what appeared to be a mistake. There is no learning from that, because nothing was wrong. That was a temporary outcome. They announced, at least, the ballroom's not shut down, but they, at least in one dance, they looked and went and decided, well, this little couple won. And that little couple is what you perceive to be, if you're ordinary, a mistake I made. Because the dance temporarily stopped and they picked out a winner. But the winner was not C or D. Unless you were pleased with it, which is not what we're talking about right now. You find the winner to be, a mistake I made. It was not a mistake. If the mistakes themselves were actually profitable, thing specific, not processes anymore, but like the dance has stopped and your mistake is a thing specific, the time that I stood there in the party. And actually, can you said Fox Pass? It wasn't a process. It was a thing specific. That was a mistake. That was a social blunder, the likes of which may have cost me a promotion. It certainly cost my fashionable position to which I was striving while waiting to get the sledgehammer in the head with the rest of my peers. So it's seen as a mistake, but for it to be apparently profitable to life, the mistake has to be seen. It has to be thought of as being a thing specific. And what I was saying becomes the real unusable aspect to a revolutionist, and it does eventually in life, it's stayed at that level, is then it becomes a law. That anything that becomes thing specific, anything that the human intellect finally chops up as it's supposed to, of processes and turns them into a thing specific, will be some kind of law. That is, that there's some kind of conclusion reached. Here, that you in one instance have decided, well, this dance has gone long enough, I think so-and-so. You have announced the winner. You have made a thing specific into a law. That, well, all right, now I got that. Or if you want it really to stretch the words, it's almost as though you decided, well, I'll operate on the basis that I think this. I'm just tired of it. I don't know where else to think with this. I have danced. I've driven myself crazy. I've whirled around until I'm getting dizzy. So I think so-and-so. You have turned it into a thing specific, but now it is a law. It is a law that the intellect will then continue to submit to. It is a God that you will now please. It is a shackle. And there is no such thing as a profitable shackle. And yet everything in the human nervous system, running back through what we've already been through tonight, down from the genitalia in the belly, being a danger to your fellow man, and vice versa, on up to here. This thing seeks, and I'm being charitable, I'm being very metaphorical, seeks the comfort of laws. In other words, it's got to think something reasonable, or it can't operate. True. But in a revolutionary sense, if it can operate at that level, it's no longer operating. It is now a faithful servant. It is now a civilized citizen of the city, and it does bow down and it submits to civilized, not behavior, because you already got to do that, or you're an idiot. But it now submits to civilized requirements of this. And as long as you're doing that, may I suggest, that is why some of this seems so insane. But other than the fact that you could also always decide, wait a minute, let's reverse that. That it is insane. See, you can't win. Unless, of course, you're right. And then you do win, because then you can forget all about this. Then you're back in the city. And the city is nothing but a collection of winners. I salute you.